Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we are diving into a safety topic that is, frankly, misunderstood on job sites and in warehouses all over the country: propane storage. And look, getting this right isn't just about ticking a compliance box. It's about preventing an absolute catastrophe.
You know, if you take a walk through most warehouses or construction sites, chances are you'll spot propane cylinders stored in ways that just flat out violate fire code. We're talking stacked too close to buildings, tucked away indoors right next to heat sources, or way too near electrical panels. Now, these aren't usually malicious mistakes. They happen because most managers just genuinely don't know the rules. But by the end of this explainer, you'll know exactly what to look for, so your site won't be one of them. Let's get into it.
So here's our game plan. We're going to start with the why, really understanding what makes propane so uniquely dangerous. Then we'll get practical and walk through the rules for storing it outside and the super strict limits for keeping it indoors. From there, we'll cover safe handling, some warehouse-specific rules, and we'll wrap up by showing you how to spot and fix the most common violations out there in the real world. Okay, let's start with the basics, because honestly, if you understand why the rules exist in the first place, you'll never forget them. So what is it that makes propane such a special kind of hazard?
It really boils down to three core properties. You absolutely need to get these because they're the foundation for all the rules we're about to cover.
First, and this one is so important, propane vapor is about 1.5 times heavier than air. Now, why does that matter so much? Well, if you have a leak, the gas isn't going to rise up and just float away. Nope, it sinks. It flows like an invisible liquid across the floor, pooling in the absolute lowest spots it can find. We're talking basements, maintenance pits, even floor drains. And that creates this hidden explosive hazard just waiting for an ignition source.
Second is its incredible expansion ratio. See, propane is stored as a liquid under a lot of pressure. When that liquid escapes, it instantly boils into a gas and expands to 270 times its original volume. Just think about that for a second. One single gallon of spilled liquid becomes 270 gallons of flammable vapor. A seemingly tiny leak can fill up a room with an explosive mixture in no time at all.
And that, of course, leads us to our third point. This stuff is incredibly flammable. What's wild here is the flammable range. Propane only needs to be about 2% of the air for it to be able to ignite. In a regular 10 by 10 foot room, that means it only takes a few ounces of propane to create a bomb. And a single spark from a tool is all it would take to set it off.
Now, when you combine all these properties in a true worst-case scenario, you get something called a BLEVE, a boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion. This is exactly why all those distance rules exist. If a fire starts near a cylinder, it heats up the liquid inside, and the pressure just skyrockets. The metal shell weakens, and the whole tank can fail catastrophically, flashing all that liquid into a massive expanding fireball. We're not talking about a small fire. This is a devastating explosion.
So, with those dangers fresh in our minds, let's talk about the safest way to store propane: outdoors. The rules here come from two main places: OSHA, which sets our federal workplace safety laws, and the NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association, which writes the fire codes that become law.
The number one rule is all about creating a buffer zone. And how big that zone is depends on how much propane you've got. For perspective, your typical forklift cylinder holds about 8 gallons. So as you can see on this chart, for larger tanks up to 500 gallons, you've got to have at least 10 feet between them and any building. Once you get over that, the distance jumps way up. These are non-negotiable minimums, and they're designed specifically to prevent a fire from turning into one of those BLEVs we just talked about.
But distance from buildings is only part of the puzzle. The next rule is just as critical, and it applies to anything and everything that could make a spark.
The magic number to burn into your brain here is 10 feet. Every single propane container, I don't care how big or small, has to be stored at least 10 feet away from any potential source of ignition. That means open flames, welding areas, sparking electrical gear, and yeah, even the exhaust from a running truck.
So when you're setting up your outdoor storage cage, just run through this quick checklist in your head. Is it on a firm, level surface, not just dirt? Is the ground non-combustible? Big one here, that means no storing cylinders on wooden pallets. Are they secured upright so they can't tip over? Are they protected from vehicle traffic with something like a bollard? And finally, is the area clear of weeds and trash? And do you have that no smoking sign posted loud and clear?
Okay, so what about bringing it inside? This is where the rules get incredibly strict, and for a really good reason. Because that vapor sinks, a leak indoors is so much more dangerous.
OSHA is crystal clear about this.
You can store very limited amounts of propane inside an industrial building, but only in very specific spots. The area has to be well ventilated and kept far away from exits, stairs, and heat sources. Now look at that prohibited list. Absolutely, positively, never in a basement, never near an electrical panel, never blocking an exit, and never anywhere without good airflow, period.
So the big question is, what does limited quantity actually mean? This is the rule that trips up so many people. The absolute maximum amount of propane you're allowed to store inside an entire industrial building is 300 pounds. That's about 9 of those standard 33-pound forklift cylinders. And get this, that's the total limit for the whole building, not per room or per floor. This is hands down one of the most misunderstood and violated rules out there.
Okay, let's shift gears and talk about what happens when these cylinders are on the move. Because the rules don't just stop at the storage cage, they apply anytime you're handling or transporting them too.
First rule of handling: never, ever roll, drag, or drop a cylinder. A falling cylinder is just incredibly dangerous. If that valve shears off, the tank can literally become an unguided missile. Always use a proper hand truck or a cart that's made for the job. Lifting it right is important, but making sure it's secure for the move is everything.
Before you move any cylinder, just run through this quick mental checklist. Is it standing upright and securely strapped in? Is that valve cap on tight? Am I putting this in an open, ventilated space? And absolutely never, ever in a closed car trunk. And lastly, take 5 seconds to give it a once-over for damage and check that requalification date stamped on the collar. An expired cylinder is an out-of-service cylinder, no exceptions. All right, let's zero in on warehouses because that's where so many of you are working with propane every single day. And there are a couple of unique rules here that catch a lot of people off guard. So here's a little pop quiz I see managers get wrong all the time. Let's say your warehouse has both propane-powered and electric forklifts. To save a little space, is it okay to store your spare propane cylinders right next to the battery charging station?
The answer to that is a hard no, and here's why. When those big industrial batteries are charging, they can actually release highly flammable hydrogen gas. That makes the entire charging station a potential ignition source. The fire code demands a minimum safety distance of 20 feet between your propane storage and any battery charging station.
Okay, let's bring it all home by looking at the most common violations an OSHA inspector or a fire marshal is going to write you up for, and the simple, easy fixes for each one.
Oh man, you see this one everywhere. People stacking cylinders horizontally on top of each other to save a little floor space. Even if they're empty, this is a direct violation. It's totally unstable, and it's a great way to damage the valves.
The fix could not be easier. Always store your cylinders vertically, standing straight up, and make sure they're secured with a chain or inside a proper cage so they can't get knocked over. Simple as that.
Here's another really common one: finding an expired cylinder mixed in with all the good ones. Propane cylinders have to be tested and requalified, usually every 12 years. Using an out-of-date cylinder isn't just illegal, it's unsafe, because the integrity of that metal tank is no longer guaranteed.
The fix here is all about process. Just make it a policy to check the requalification date on every single cylinder that gets delivered to your site. If you find one that's expired, pull it from service right away, label it clearly, and get your supplier to come pick it up. So, now that you've heard the rules, I want you to take a quick mental walk through your own facility. Think about your storage cage, your forklift area, the way your team handles the cylinders. Does your workplace pass the test?
Staying on top of these rules really is the first step to creating a safer workplace for everyone. For more practical explainers on OSHA and fire safety, make sure you subscribe to HSE Study. Thanks so much for watching.